this is on. I am going to make sure we save enough time for everything. So my introduction is to introduce the person who's going to introduce the event. Ms. Paxton Rigby.
Hi everyone, good morning. That's a good, you're awake. My name is Mrs. Paxton Rigby, and I work here at the school, kindergarten through second grade art teacher, but I'm also the director of community and inclusion, which means I think a lot about the people here and the ways that we connect with each other and the world. And today, we're thinking about identity and Africa, and I want to share a little story with you. When I was growing up, I definitely had a myth about Africa. Can anyone think of one of the biggest myths you could possibly have about Africa? And I don't know everyone's name. What is your name?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, can you say it nice and loud? What do you think is the myth?
War.
That it's always at war. That's a big one. Absolutely. Does anyone have any other ones in the back?
Edwin, and that there's not much water.
That there's not much water. Okay. Other thoughts?
Alex, and that it's a very poor country.
Absolutely under-resourced. Lauren?
It's very unsophisticated.
Unsophisticated, primitive perhaps, is a word that maybe I've heard. Yes?
My name's Kate, and a myth is that all Africans can run fast.
They are,
All Africans can run fast.
can run fast. Right. So we could come up with obviously in the first 15 seconds of our time together, we came up with quite a few. The one that I learned about as a grown-up, which is something that I think I hear about a lot, is that Africa is not a country. Can you raise your hand and say what it is? Say it together. Beautiful. Africa is not a country, it is a continent. And when I was growing up, I grew up in New York City, which is a really diverse place. There's people from all over the world. But in my little area, in my neighborhood, it was mostly Puerto Rican and Dominican and a lot of Orthodox Jews. So I wasn't really around many Africans until I went to high school. When I went to high school, a lot of the girls there were born in Africa because their parents were working as diplomats in New York City. So they taught me a lot. And it was interesting. The reason why I connected with them was because my mom is an immigrant. So I looked nothing like my girlfriends in high school. All of them were African. They were African with dark skin. They eventually identified themselves as African Americans, but at the time they saw themselves as Africans. Not all of them. They've changed the way they're identifying. So I wanted to share a little bit of my identity with you. And I'm going to share with you my identity that may change your perspective on me. I am a white woman, cisgendered woman. When I walk into a room, for a lot of people, that's what they see. But I'm actually half Latina, and I really feel culturally very Latina. I grew up speaking Spanish at home. And I think living in that mix of identities and having people see something that was different than how I felt on the inside was really interesting to me and continues to be. So today, some of the panelists might share a little bit about their personal identities as well as their connections to Africa. And you in your minds can kind of put some of that together, and you'll piece together probably a more complicated story about these people than you knew before. And I love this picture. It's hard to see the text, but it says, "See things in a new perspective." Kind of like how I try to convince my daughter that the world is round when we're looking at the horizon on the beach. That's why I picked this picture. So we're going to dive right in. I want you all to be thinking about questions, okay? Because 4 folks are going to be speaking today. Miss Emily Demore, who you know very well, will speak about South Africa. Mr. Marcus Penn will speak about Ghana. Miss Tina Ashmala will speak about Egypt and Tanzania. And Miss Jenny Dallas will speak about South Africa as well. So we're going to dive right in.
Good morning, everyone. Awesome. My name is Ms. DeMoore, and I teach 7th and 8th grade science. I identify as a white person, although arguably my skin is more of a peachy color, if you will. I prefer the gender pronoun she. I'm up here today because I was born and grew up in South Africa, which is a country that sits at the southernmost tip of the African continent. I have a South African passport, but also one from the Netherlands, and I live permanently here in the US. One could perhaps call me a Euro-African American. I'm very lucky to have all of these documents. My home city is in Cape Town, which is the southernmost city in the country. I lived in South Africa until I was 11 years old and had a really wonderful childhood growing up there. My family spent a lot of time outdoors, and during our holidays we went camping to many of the nature reserves in South Africa and the neighboring countries. So the pictures of me up there as a young girl were taken in the Okavango Delta of Botswana. And for my life science classes, yes, that is where I met Hidalgo. Hidalgo is not an African name, however. Since my family left and since I started earning my own money, I go back to visit as often as possible, either to visit family and friends who still live there, or to work or volunteer. So right after I graduated college, I went back to South Africa and worked for a year at an HIV/AIDS clinic. I've also volunteered with the Smithsonian Institute in Gabon, which is a country in West Central Africa that is home to a portion of the Congo rainforest, and they were documenting biodiversity there, which was a really cool project. The top left picture is one of me from my most recent visit to Cape Town, and I don't think I'm biased when I say that Cape Town is one of the top tourist city destinations out there. And I love doing a new touristy activity every time I go back. I'm on Robben Island off the coast of Cape Town, and I went there to pay tribute to our former president, Nelson Mandela, who is one of the greatest leaders of all time. He spent 18 years in prison on Robben Island for protesting against a very unjust political system that separated and treated people unequally based on the color of their skin. The dress I'm wearing, I bought in South Africa, and if you're ever in Africa, you'll see that a number of people there wear clothing made of this beautiful, colorful cloth that is decorated with bold and artistic patterns. I have a plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about South Africa and both sing the praises of this wonderful continent as well as talk about some of my experiences with some of its challenges. So thank you very much.
Give Mr. Moore.
All right, good morning, wonderful students. Again, my name is Marcus Penn, Marcus Adeshima Penn. And I have African heritage. I identify as an African American. I am often perceived as mixed because of my skin tone. I feel and know that I am a black person. I'm a black man. And my pronouns again are he and and so my connection to Ghana, West Africa, is that. First, just my best friends from medical school were from Ghana, and their parents gave an invitation to come to Ghana. And so I had first gone in 2007, and went there to visit and connect and learn about just my heritage, knowing that my African heritage was connected to the slave trade. That's just how my family history came here to the United States. So I wanted to explore that. So I went there in 2007, and also in 2018, I connected with a cultural exchange group of folks, of poets, and so we all did a poetry exchange there too. So pictures-wise, looking at the first pictures on the left, your left. So the top and the bottom, I was walking through one of the villages just outside of the capital of Ghana, Accra. The town is called Akapom. And so we connected with the family and just really got to see that a lot of the families there are very, the word is matriarchal. Have you heard that word? Matriarchal? Yeah, so so run by largely women. So you can see that in the picture. And then also, I happened to be there during the 50th anniversary of independence from British colonial rule. So Ghana had their independence in 1957, and so I was there in 2007. So this flag is the same flag that you can see I was wearing in the picture, the bottom picture on the left. And so there was a big celebration there. So I got to go there. And so what was really special about the visit, a couple things. So first was, as we're talking about identity, African identity, when I had gone there and arrived there, I was actually perceived as European. And I was actually kind of hurt by that, knowing that I wanted to connect to my heritage, I wanted to connect to my African brothers and sisters. And so it showed up as higher cab prices, given a name called Obruni, meaning someone of lighter skin, European heritage. So those were some terms there. But what really was most impactful for me, and this is looking at the middle pictures, was when I had gone to the slave castles. And so this was truly tracing, connecting to my heritage, where the big open area where slaves were bought and sold, and then going through what's called a door of no return, where they were put on the ships. And so I went through that, I'd gone through that door. And so to feel that was so powerful. I still can feel it even as I'm talking about it right now. So just tracing that was very powerful for me, and just a part of connecting to my heritage. And the gold picture in the center is actually inside of the slave dungeons. And you see there's a light there. There was no light there when my African brothers and sisters were there. So just to be in there really touched me deeply. And so then lastly, again, the last two photos on the right, you're right, looking at that picture. On the right was the cultural exchange where we exchanged poetry. And we had poetry pen pals. And what was very special was that a lot of the issues and concerns for African Americans were actually quite similar to many of the Africans in Ghana. So for racial identity, for racism, a lot of that. So it was a lot of learning that was going on there. So Ghana was very powerful. And then lastly, Ghana's president, first president was Kwame Nkrumah. You'll see a picture once we have all the images in the windows of the library soon, and he was very much about Pan-Africanism, connecting and collecting all the countries of Ghana, all the countries of Africa to be like the United States. So that's what Pan-Africanism, and the first president of Ghana was about that. So just want to give a little history lesson. So I will conclude here, and they can have questions after. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tina Ashmala, and I identify as Arab American. I get the pleasure of talking about two different countries in Africa today. One is Egypt, and the other one is Tanzania. When they first asked me to do this panel, I immediately thought of Tanzania because I've been helping work out there for 17 years at an orphanage, and I myself forgot that my heritage as an Egyptian is actually African also. So I bet a lot of you forget that the whole top of Africa are all Arab countries. You have Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt. Those are all actually considered part of the Middle East, but they are all on the continent of Africa. I am half Egyptian. My father is from Egypt. He came here when he was 25. I decided when I was 25 to trade places, and I went to Egypt to live for 2 years. I was lucky enough to land a job as a kindergarten teacher for one of the years that I was there, and I lived in Cairo. One of the things about Egypt is it is a 97% Muslim country. My family is Coptic. Coptic is one of the oldest forms of Christianity. So my family was very persecuted there, and they did leave to come to the States to find more opportunities. My last name, Ashmala, actually means grace of God. Egypt is an amazing country. You can see by the pictures, I was allowed to do a lot of really fun things. Camel rides, go to the pyramids. I traveled all across the country in a lot of the Middle East, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. But one of my favorite things to do on Fridays, I was allowed to go rent horses at the pyramids and ride out to the desert and see the pyramids from afar, which was amazing. Egypt is a very diverse country as far as its politics. It has a lot of kind of chaos lately, and it's not always safe to visit. Right now, it's not a great situation in Egypt. It's kind of ebbed and flowed for the last couple of years. But I would definitely suggest when it gets safer that you go visit Egypt. It's an amazing country with beautiful antiquities, and they're doing a lot to save those and preserve them for the future. I wanted to talk about Egypt because I think people forget that it is part of Africa, but I actually came here today to talk about Tanzania and the work that I do in Tanzania. This is the slide I put together. So I was lucky enough to just go out there 2 weeks ago, or actually 3 weeks ago now. And Tanzania is in East Africa. It's right below Kenya. It is kind of the place you think of typically. It's very dry. It is, there are parts of it that are very rural. I heard people say that, you know, it's maybe not as rich of a country. There's definitely cities in Africa, like in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam is a very big city with big buildings. It looks very similar to some of our big cities. But then you have very rural villages that still have some mud huts. You have the Maasai people who still live in mud huts. They still farm. They have no running electricity. They have no running water. So it's a mix. A lot of countries in Africa are a mix of both. I was fortunate enough to go out 17 years ago and meet an African woman. Her name is Happiness. You can't get much better than Happiness. And she told me before I left Africa, I really want to start an orphanage, but I don't know how. She was really ingenious. She would go collect the beggar children as their parents begged, and she would sit under a tree and teach them English every day. And I was amazed at her tenacity of what she would do. She would go to the bread factory and she would beg for day-old bread to feed the children. And at that time, you can see in the picture all the way, that's what the kids looked like when I was there 17 years ago in that first picture. So I came home and my brother helped build a website, and we thought, well, we'll send volunteers to her and they can help with the children. That was 17 years ago. I had the pleasure of seeing her just a few weeks ago. She now has 193 kids. She runs 2 schools and a clinic, and she takes the kids that are the most needy. She goes into the slums of Tanzania and she finds the children whose parents either have passed away or have AIDS or alcoholics or any destitute child, and she brings them in, feeds them, she gives them 3 meals a day, and she educates them. Her dream is to have 400 children one day, and I hope to help her get there. You can see Happiness in the middle picture. And then this is the school, one of the schools that I got to visit, Camp Joseph. And my husband and I helped purchase the land 14 years ago now. It's huge. The kids were so lovely. They still, when I was just there, they just got electricity. So for the last decade and a half, they've lived with no electricity in their dormitory. They just got running water 4 years ago. A lot of the kids are missing shoes on their feet. They eat the exact same meal, 3 meals a day. They eat kind of a mashed potato with lentils every single day, 3 meals a day. But these kids never stop smiling. They're always smiling, and when I ask them, how are you so happy all the time? They said, we have a bed to sleep in, we have food 3 meals a day, and they know that if they were on the streets, that would not be possible anymore. They would not have a meal, they would skip a meal, they'd be begging for food, they'd be not getting a great education. So it's amazing what you can do coming back to this country and being so far away. We were able just to give her a leg up to start what she needed to start. And one of the things that I was thinking about when they asked me to be on this panel was when I was there 17 years ago and I approached some of the nonprofits in Tanzania that were run by Swiss or companies from the UK or nonprofits from the United States. One of the things they said to me is, don't trust an African person. This country is very corrupt, and you can't put your faith and help them raise money because they'll just pocket the money. And I knew this woman was not that type of person. You have to be able to trust people. And one of the things I thought was fascinating is a lot of these nonprofits are going into these countries and they're helping the people, but they're not helping the people help themselves. And I wanted to help this woman help herself. So she's run this organization on her own as an African woman for 17 years, and she's accomplished so much by herself. So thank you.
local language in that area is Xhosa. And if I were to greet you in Xhosa this morning, I would say Molweni Abantwana. So I was lucky enough to live in many, many countries, but I consider myself African, even though I have a white skin, and a little American. But listening to Mr. Moore this morning, I guess more than that, I'm really a European African, because many, many people in Africa are descendants of one or other European country. And my grandparents grew up and were born in the United Kingdom. My parents were born in South Africa, and I lived the first 30 years of my life there. So I'm a very proud South African. It's a wonderful, welcoming, diverse country. I only wish it was a lot closer to California. I recently visited in January, and it is, I looked on Google, it's 10,000 miles away. But worse than that, it takes about 30 hours of traveling to get there. So it's a really long way. And I have some of my best friends and family are still there. And the time difference is 10 hours. So when I'm dropping Danielle for school and listening to the local radio, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, but I'm listening to the evening news. So it's quite difficult to keep up and keep those connections going. Some of the things I remember, first of all, we have glorious sunshine all year round. Not rain like here, day after day. I remember, in fact, lots of droughts. We used to collect water in buckets when we were showering. Another thing is the beautiful beaches. I really think that I've traveled a lot, and I believe it's the best beaches in the world. Miles of golden sand. And together with the wonderful weather, one of the South African traditions is to barbecue often. Except we don't call it barbecuing, we call it braaivleis. And we would do that 2-3 times a week. That's one of our favorite pastimes. A very famous myth in most parts of the world is that wild animals roam the streets of Africa. And that's not true. But we did often have visits from various insects. Large hairy spiders are very common in your house, and really not a big deal. And I know now living here that when my children see a spider, they scream and call for help. But really we see that often. And also it wasn't uncommon to have a gardener find a snake in the garden. That's also not a very big deal. Another thing I remember is we learned a lot of languages. So we learned English, and then the other language I learned at school was Afrikaans, which is a type of Dutch, or form of Dutch. I learned Xhosa growing up, and then in high school I had to learn Latin. So when my kids say they've got a lot of languages to do, I want to say, I think we have all. Another very, very important thing in South Africa, and you see my 2 children with the South African flag on their face, is supporting sport. And rugby and cricket are the biggest sports, and we would love to watch that for many hours. All in all, I don't think my life in South Africa was very different to the way you guys are growing up here. The only thing is that I didn't realize at the time how privileged I was, that I had a really good education, that I had all the opportunities given to me. I could do any sport, I was able to do ballet and art, etc. And I only realized in high school that actually that was a privilege of only the white people. So I grew up in South Africa in the apartheid times. And I won't go into detail because we don't have time, but really that meant that if you weren't white, you didn't have the same opportunities and the same schooling and the same facilities. And that went on for many, many years until Nelson Mandela was released from prison, which was a very memorable day for every South African. It's something that's etched in our minds forever. And then there was the first democratic election in 1994, and he was elected president of the first democratic South Africa. And I'm happy to answer any questions too. Thank you.
Wow, so in just about 15 minutes, we got an incredible download
perspectives on them. I want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you have of any of the panelists. We have, I'm not going to tell you. Anyone have any questions? You can ask them to elaborate on something as well, if there's something you want to know more about. No questions? Really? No question is a dumb question, okay? You can ask anything at all. Wow. Are you in shock? Is everybody all right? Okay. Thank you.
I have a question for Mrs. Dallas. When growing up, did you not, I understand like in high school you finally noticed that you're understanding things, and did you just not see that at all, like when you were growing up?
So now I ask myself that question. And the one thing is that I really never saw black people. So in the apartheid times, blacks weren't allowed to go to the same beaches. They didn't even use the same lines in a bank. They didn't ride the same buses. They didn't sit on the same benches as we did. So the only contact I had, and it was a wonderful contact, was with my nanny, who would live with the family throughout the week and go home on the weekends. But there was also even a system where if you were not white and you were out in the evening, you had to carry a document with you. It was called a dorm pass. And if you didn't have that with you and you were stopped, you were immediately put in jail. And I still ask myself, of course, my family were quite liberal. I was from British descent and we voted against that, but it never was successful in having them come to power in the government. The other thing I considered was we had no internet growing up. And I think that's one thing that's very powerful today. We had no internet, we had no television actually. So I was, I think, 12 before there was television, and then it was state controlled. So the only news that we saw, and that was in my family, we listened to the radio in the evenings, I remember listening to BBC. And that was the only international news we had. Otherwise, it was just what the government was telling us. So it's pretty frightening. But by the time I got to high school and when I went to college, there was a lot more a lot of things happening at that time. And then very soon after that, a lot of political prisoners were released and things moved in the right direction.
Thank you.
Okay, now students have questions. We have to wrap up. Okay, great. We're going to do 2 minutes, which means we might do one question. I apologize. I have something to share though. I'm going to print out these slides, and maybe we can have a question wall. And next week we'll have a space where you can actually inquire, write your questions down, and maybe you all would be willing to email us the answers. Okay, so we're going to take one.
I have a question for Mrs. Dallas. So did the Africans live in different places as well?
Yes, the Africans lived in their own areas, and we called them townships, and that's where they'd go back in the evening. But sadly also, I think a lot of them were working at homes, domestic workers. And the sad thing, again, I didn't appreciate at the time, was they weren't allowed to have their husbands or families stay with them in the week. So they would stay with us all week and only go home on the weekend to be with their families. And if ever one of their husband or someone tried to visit them and they were caught, they would go to jail. So it was sad.
To clarify, you're talking about the Black Africans, right? Okay. So friends, a lot of lessons here. Something that I'm hearing is that there are so many different perspectives on each country. We have 2 very different accounts of South Africa too, which I think is kind of interesting. And to Ms. McMillan's question, there are probably things in your world that you can't see yet, perhaps because of your exposure or your experience. So I encourage you to question everything that you think and see. Okay?
We'll dismiss by grade, is that the easiest way?
Let's give a round of applause. I'm processing it. I can come up with a question. I'm still processing the 4 different stories that I heard. So thank you very much. I understand on your first period classes, but we'll have opportunities to continue this conversation. Cultural focus